the informed investor, thanks to Century 21 agents, defying mediocrity and delivering extraordinary experiences.
Yes, we catch up with Century 21 every Monday night. Quite extraordinary clearance rate across Sydney at the weekend. Has the Sydney market rebounded? It seems like it has. Warren McCarthy is Century 21 CEO. He joins me on the line. Great to catch up with you again, Warren.
Yeah, good evening, Steve. This amazing results from the weekend. I saw Sydney was 74.7%. Now, that's extraordinary when you consider the same time last year, it was 49.4%. Melbourne was pretty similar, as 67.9% clearance on the weekend and 56.2% a year ago. So I think that's a trend that's certainly saying that the market's definitely on the improve, and it's a good sign for everyone.
Certainly surged back after that cut by the Reserve Bank in interest rates, but not a lot of that has flowed through yet. Just drilling down into those figures with your experience, Warren, might that 74.7 be perhaps you've got to read into that? Is there perhaps less stock around?
Yeah, I think that's the point. I think the message I'm getting out of CoreLogic is that it's the new listings coming to the market are the slowest in many, many years. And notwithstanding that, when you look at some of the areas of, say, in the inner circle of Sydney and even Melbourne, in the eastern suburbs, for instance, I mean, they've had a 69% clearance rate for 63 auctions that were put, available to the public. In the inner west of Sydney, 87% clearance rate, which is extraordinary. But they're in areas that I would suggest have got pretty good consistent demand and probably a slightening stock level, and they're competing now for that particular stock. And the same's being experienced in Melbourne. I see in the inner east there, the suburbs of Hamilton, Canterbury, Malvern, a 66% clearance rate for 98 auctions that were put up to the public on the weekend. So interesting signs at the moment. I think it's got a lot to do with demand versus supply.
When you talk to your officers, I know you do regularly, I mean, are they finding it difficult to get good property to sell?
I think what's happening is that there have been a lot of people that have been sitting on their hands, and right up to the election that was the case. The vendors have, since the election has come and gone, have started to think, well, okay, let's put our plans into motion now, whether that be on the buy side or the sell, because they haven't got the impulse that was being mooted from the Labor Party in regards to the capital gains tax changes and the negative gearing changes. And I think the freeing up by APRA with the loan repayment capacity guidelines and the assessment of their particular customers has just created a little bit more confidence. And with that, people tend to get out there and get a bit more active. Albeit in Sydney over the weekend, you wouldn't have been too active given the weather.
No, you wouldn't. It got even worse today. Warren McCarthy is the CEO of Century 21 Australasia. You have to feel for the residents of that tower block in Mascot, told at 8 o'clock Friday night to get out by 9. A lot of them couldn't get back in there today. Let's just talk about, in general terms, the idea of buying off the plan into a building complex that you can't see it until it's completed. What's your feeling about what this is going to do to the market that we're now seeing buildings, and this one's 10 to 12 years old, that is starting to develop cracks? I mean, what would you be telling people?
Terrible set of circumstances, and certainly feel for those people that were occupants of that building there in the Sydney Mascot. Being that it is 10 to 12-year-old, I think there's a lot of questions have to be asked around the planning and building process, and with that, there'll be question asked certainly around the approvals, the engineering side of things. But I did also read that there could be other circumstances relative to other works going on into the area. I'm sure that will come out in an investigation. But nonetheless, when people are dislocated like they have been, just out of left field like that, you've got to think, well, what can and can't they do? I mean, if they're tenants, where do they go? What do they do? And the same goes with the owner-occupiers. That the only freedom or any sense of help given by the Office of Fair Trading is that they've got to go and check out their strata schemes insurance arrangements. Well, that's not a really quick fix solution, I don't think, and it doesn't help. But to your question, when people are buying off the plan, there's certainly that element of what may be at the end when the property is settled. But there's a hell of a lot of checks and balances that go in. And since January of last year, they did introduce a strata building bond and inspection scheme. I suppose in short form, what that means is that developers have to lodge a 2% amount of the contract price of the building. And why that's for is that any defective work that's seen in the immediate 3 years after the building has been completed can be fixed and worked upon fairly promptly, knowing that there is a bond in shape for that work to be done and for payments to be made. But look, that's not going to help the situation that's currently afoot at the Mascot building that's, as I say, 12 years old and well beyond any particular bond that might have been in place some years ago.
Well, you look at that, the building at Homebush, the Opal Tower. I told tonight there's still 71 people not being able to go back into their apartments there. This Mascot building, it's been named and photographed. People know what it is. It becomes a toxic property. I mean, as a real estate agent, you'd battle to sell something in that complex, would you not, given what people know about it?
And would you believe I'm hearing that some particular properties that may in fact have similar problems are now becoming reluctant to even report them due to the potential impact that they can have on both
100%,
the value
100%.
of them and of course the insurance situation with them. But if you're an owner of a dwelling of that nature and you've got finance to that particular property, I wonder what happens then in terms of the insurance associated with that mortgage as well. So there's a lot of elements that come into this particular play of what goes on. I think the government needs to come to foot pretty quickly and offer some degree of understanding of protection or relief for these particular people.
I agree completely. Warren, thank you very much. I'll talk to you next week.
Pleasure. Thank you. Cheers.
Warren McCarthy there, Century 21 CEO, and I did hear that tonight, that a lot of body corporates now, when there is a potential of damage to a building, they're just keeping it quiet. Because the last thing they want, the people who own these properties, for anyone to find out they have an issue.